I wonder if any of you find it odd that in the middle of a prayer, people speak, and that's what prayer is. We talk to God, and it's not. I think that in a lot of places you have to be silent and you have to hold your head down. And I'm pleased that that's not the way we're seeing it right now. It's a conversation with God, and we're all in the conversation. And I like it kind of a lot that people feel free to go ahead and speak up while we're in that conversation.
Okay, we are on Elijah, week 4, where we left off. Elijah had just done the showdown at Mount Carmel, and God's power, Yahweh's power, was definitely shown. After that, the rain was coming, and that was the end of chapter 18. Then we took a skip and we went out of order, and we went to chapter 21. So we skipped 2 chapters, and the reason we skipped 2 chapters was to understand Elijah and understand Jezebel and Ahab's relationship a little bit more. And we found out just how evil Jezebel was with the story of Naboth. Do you want to say something about that real quick?
Yeah, two things that when we saw that, as Mary said, the showdown at Mount Carmel, right? The shootout at Mount Carmel. It's just like Jonah was not a story about a big fish. Remember that real famous story is not about the priests of Baal. It's about the people of Israel. And through that display, we saw that the people of Israel who had been turned away partly by these really bad kings, especially Ahab, suddenly realize, and they actually say Yahweh is God. Yahweh is the God. If you read it carefully, is what it says. That's important to keep in mind. That whole display is not just a fun thing for some big story for all these years later. It's to make us understand that God was calling his people back. He did this show explicitly to remind them and to bring them back, and we see that it had that effect. So, and then the other part, of course, as Mary said, we skip forward because what we're going to look at today is something that puzzles a lot of people, how after that big show, we could have Elijah being afraid. You'd think he would be even more bold, but we went and looked at Jezebel and how treacherous and just evil she was. Ahab was a slacker compared to her. She's the daughter of a priest king, and you see her set a man up, bring false witnesses, and have him killed so that she could get the vineyard that Ahab was too weak to do for himself. You remember her saying, aren't you the king? Don't you rule here? Well, why are you hesitating to just have this man killed? Well, Jezebel took care of it. And that's the Jezebel that Elijah knows. Now, should he have been afraid of her? No. But the beauty of the what we have in this scriptures is that we see all of these people are people. They're not icons, they're not movie characters, and we see some of these weaknesses and flaws, and we should in that see ourselves and realize, okay, we mess up, but there's always a place. God takes us back. There's a path home. And so that's why we skipped. But remember that situation with Jezebel today, and it's going to explain a lot of what goes on.
So at the end of chapter 18, like I said, Mount Carmel, the showdown had happened. The Lord started sending the rain after 3.5 years. And Elijah told Ahab to get in his chariot and go back to Jezreel. Jezreel is is not the capital of Israel. It is the sort of a military outpost. And so that's where he was going back to. And I'm going to go back to verse 18 of chapter 18, or I'm sorry, verse 46 of chapter 18. And the hand of the Lord came upon Elijah, and he tucked his cloak into his belt and ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. And remember, that was about 25 miles. So God gave him the strength, and he basically ran a marathon, and he ran ahead of the chariot, which was going through mud because it was raining. So that's where he is. Okay, chapter 19.
Well, let me,
Oh,
there's
sorry.
one thing on that,
He
because
goes away,
I
comes
was
back.
I was puzzled about that. Why is that in there? Why does he run ahead of Ahab? And we don't know. It's just not there. But I tried to figure out, why would he do something like that? And I think, based on what happens next, that he may think, okay, after this big showdown, I've just changed everything. And you see how, I mean, now everything will be different. Ahab and Jezebel are going to see the power of God, and he's run ahead to get out in front and sort of bask in the glory. It's a theory, but I like it. I mean, I think of course it's mine, so of course I like it. But the idea, I think, is that he may have really have expected that after all of this, he's going to get out ahead and be there when all the big change happens, and that's not what happens.
So I'm on 1 Kings chapter 19. There you go. So I see some people looking for it. 1 Kings chapter 19. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "May the gods deal with me, and ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like the lives of those you killed." And Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself traveled on a day's journey into the wilderness. I'm going to stop there.
Okay. That expression, "may the gods deal with me and ever so severely," is just sort of an oath. It's sort of like Scarlett O'Hara saying, "As God is my witness, I'll never be poor," whatever it was. I don't even remember anymore. But that's what they're saying, that may the gods punish me if I don't do what I'm saying. And that is, if I don't make you just as dead as you made all of my prophets by this time tomorrow. And this is the part that hangs people up. This is what we found as we studied.
I was telling Scott when I got to here, right after, if you read it just in the order and you finish Mount Carmel and the big showdown, and then you hear Elijah was afraid. I'm thinking that doesn't make any sense. Go ahead.
And so I guess maybe he's not afraid of the prophets of Baal, because the Baal is just hunks of wood and stone, but he knows Jezebel. I mean, she's a force to be reckoned with. And we have those moments. But that's when we started thinking, if he expected this big display at Mount Carmel to change the country, he's going to change Ahab and Jezebel. They're going to see God's power and go, "Oh, we've been fools. Let's get back." And he gets there, and in his mind, nothing changed. And it did, remember, because the people came back. But if he expected that, then it kind of makes sense. It's like, what was this all for? Jezebel's going to kill me. But it tells us Elijah was afraid, and people have a hard time with that. There's the idea that we all, at times, we may be bold, we may be strong, and then something hits us, and the next minute we're weak, we waver. "Oh Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief," right? That old saying, that there are times where we do believe, but we lose sight of things.
And me, I always like to know how far these people are traveling. So I'm always like figuring out. So that he went from Jezreel to Beersheba, and that was 95 miles. So he and his servant went for 95 miles, and then he left his servant there.
He just drops him off. I guess he knows he's going out, and he dropped him in a safe place, which is kind of nice.
When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself traveled on a day's journey into the wilderness. He sat down under a broom tree and prayed that he might die. "I've had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life, for I am no better than my father's."
And does this remind you of Jonah at all, where Jonah says, "You might as well just kill me"? We see these themes. There's
These prophets seem to sit under trees.
Yeah, and he says, "I'm no better than my ancestors." And that's where I started saying, hey, wait a minute. He thought he was going to change everything, and he didn't. And he just says, I'm no better than anybody. I didn't accomplish my goal, but there's the idea. It was his goal. There was another plan. And we see, and what we're going to see upcoming is that there's been a plan for a long time, a far reaching one, but he hits that point of sort of despair of this is what I wanted and I didn't get it. You might as well just kill me. I'm just disgusted with everything.
Well, but I heard in my reading a different thing. Number one, I agree with you that he wanted immediate relief for his effort.
Yeah.
He didn't get it. He's been obedient several times. He didn't get it. It's not his plan. It's God's plan.
Yeah.
Number one. Two is my ancestors, this prayer. Take my life. I've been a failure. I'm not any better than my ancestors. And that not only gets us back to Jonah, but it gets us back to my ancestors is Yahweh. He's been following all this down here, and none of my ancestors have succeeded. So take my life. I'm done. But I don't think it's the fear of Jezebel. It is his own failure because he thinks that it's his plan and it isn't.
There's some of that. I mean, and since I'm speculating, I certainly can't say that somebody else's speculation is wrong. I mean, I don't know, but we do see later, shortly, that he is afraid of Jezebel. There's
Well,
no
it
doubt
says-
about it.
it
Yeah,
says it
well,
was your
but it's specifically, you listen to what's coming up, and he's going to talk about, he's in fear for his life because he has a conversation with God about it.
Then he laid down under the
Oh,
broom.
hold on.
Oh, sorry.
What about Mary? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's good.
But it emphasized to me his commitment.
Yeah,
I mean, he's in it
there's.
all the way, and then he doesn't get there, but he's not giving up on the Lord yet.
No, you know, it's a good point that all of us, I think, I don't know, maybe I'm the only one, but we reach those points where we're in this conflict. I know there's times where I have my heart set on something though, and it doesn't go, and I've had people tell me, like in times of sickness, we've done all this stuff for God all these years, and now how can he allow this to, we hit those points. And the beauty of it is, if we see this in ourselves, what comes next should serve as sort of an example, some form of help for what happens when we get there.
Then he laid down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." And he looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. A second time, the angel of the Lord returned and touched him, saying, "Get up and eat, or the journey will be too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. And strengthened by that food, he walked 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. So first of all, Horeb, the mountain of God, is also thought to be, or in some translations, it says Mount Sinai. And once again, I wanted to know how long that was. And it's only like an 11-day walk. And there's all these people that talk about, if you Google, I think people need a better life, but anyhow, why did it take him 40 days to walk something that could have taken 11 as the crow flies?
And these are the things that make me all crazy, like as we study and read commentaries. So it's 90 miles.
No, we don't know. It's more than 90 miles, I think, on this, that part. But go
I'm
ahead.
sorry that it is, there's places where it's given as an 11-day journey, and he takes 40 days and nights. Well, the distance may be 11 days, and people actually sit down and calculate the distance and go, why would it take him 40 days? It must not be true. Well, and they're looking for a reason to think something's not true. If you know about Sinai, and remember, that's the place where Moses goes and receives the commandments. It's mountainous. Travel gets a lot slower in the mountains. And if you're familiar, that area is known as the Negev Desert. when you're traveling through the desert, you don't travel in the heat of the day. You don't get a full day's walk in. So if you're worried about how far it is and whether or not it makes sense, it makes
And
sense.
the other thing, 40 days and 40 nights.
40 is a significant number, and it's one of those things, it has to do with completion of something, completion of generation, so yeah, I mean, it's significant. When you see those numbers, Gene, you brought that up last week. We see times where it says in a battle, he slew 1,000 people. And I say this before, I'm sure I'll say it again. It doesn't mean that he starts killing people and it's 998, 999, 1,000, I'm done. There, I quit. And it's just, we have to be better than that. It is supposed to show us that it's it's a large number, but it's not designed for us to sit down and say, oh my goodness, it's exactly 1,000. And we have a historical record that there were only 900 people in that unit. It's not meant for that, but he does travel roughly, maybe exactly 40 days, and he gets to Mount Sinai. And it just for now, keep in mind, that's the place when Moses receives the commandments, and it refers to it as, it's known as the mountain of God. This is a very significant place. If you're Elijah and you're traveling to Sinai, Mount Sinai, you're looking for a sign, you're looking for a place. And if you think that maybe he feels like God hasn't acted as powerfully as he should, you go right to the source in his mind. You go to a place where God has acted powerfully, and what he's going to do is more or less look for an accounting. Let's talk about it.
And Elijah would have very much known that Moses got the 10 commandments.
Everybody, every Jew knows that.
Where Elijah entered a cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him saying, what are you doing here, Elijah?
So it's not like, what are you doing here, Elijah? I didn't know you were coming. I live on this mountain. If you had told me, I would have baked something. It's not that kind of a deal. It's a legitimate question. What are you doing here? What do you think you're doing coming here? But what I want you to pay attention to about this is, obviously God knows he's coming. Obviously God understands these things, but he sent this angel ahead and made food for him, prepared him for the journey, even if it's something that he's not necessarily supposed, he shouldn't have doubted God. God prepared him for the journey. He says, that's okay, come on out, we'll talk about it. And here's this question, so what are you doing here? And I love the response.
I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, he replied. But the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I am the only one left, and they're seeking my life as well.
Can I just borrow yours real quick? I'm going to read this. I'm going to read this differently for you. Being zealous for the Lord means I've done all this stuff for you, right? You owe me. I've done all this stuff for you. And so where is this? It's right. Yeah, here it is. So I'm going to read this in a different tone of voice, and I want you to listen to it. Elijah, what are you doing here? I've been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, you replied, but the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, torn down your idols, and killed your prophets with the sword. I'm the only one left, and they're even trying to kill me. This is whiny. It is. It's just him going, you have not taken care of me the way you should. I've done all of this stuff, and look what's happened. They've done your own people have abandoned you, and they've killed your prophets with the sword, and now they're looking to take my life too. And
some of this isn't true. I mean, the fact of
only I'm left.
I'm the only one left. First of all, there's 100 prophets that are in caves. Second of all, that they've forsaken them, but after Mount Carmel, they said, oh my gosh, Yahweh is the true God. Now, maybe, obviously Ahab and Jezreel didn't turn around, but we don't know that the rest of them said, Yahweh is the God. So here he is. It didn't turn out exactly like I want it. And I'm going to complain.
But I make fun of it and I talk about how kind of whiny this is. I've been this guy. I don't know about the rest of you, but I've been that, I have been in that whiny mode. It's the reason I feel a little bit safe kind of projecting it onto him, because we tend to do that. We tend to go, hey, this, what's going on? You're not doing what I want. You're not taking care of me properly.
I did everything right.
Yeah.
Then the Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. Behold, the Lord is about to pass by.
And there's the response. I tell you what, all right, I asked you a serious question. You come back with this. Let's take this outside, right? Step outside. I'm about to pass by, and then we're, and watch how this happens. You want to?
And I'm going to read this section, but try to listen to this differently, because this is one of those passages at the end that a lot of you have heard, and we'll talk about it, but just try to listen to it with new ears.
This is my favorite moment from out of the study of Elijah. This is the one, and I realized nobody in my life had ever talked to me or preached it before, and I didn't realize.
And a great and mighty wind tore into the mountains and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a still small voice.
Stop right there. There it is, the still small voice. For starters, it says the wind came, but the Lord was not in the wind. Clearly, he's behind the wind, though. I mean, we understand, we get, he says, I'm about to pass by. And Elijah sees this incredible display of power.
That shattered the rocks.
Job sees an incredible display of power. When Moses was there, when he first goes up onto Sinai, and God's going to speak, there's a cloud of smoke, right? They see, and the rest of the people are instructed, don't even touch the base of the mountain. You sit down and watch. But there's this display. Then there is fire, and it says that the mountain shook. All of these things, but even Moses to a lesser degree than what's displayed to Elijah here. I mean, this is significant. And he gets this display, but it says the Lord was not in it. The point is, the message that God has for him wasn't the earthquake, wasn't the fire, wasn't the wind. He gets a display of who God is, but then there's a still small voice. I have heard, and over the last few weeks, when we do a study, I always go read commentaries, and it's all of this stuff about how God speaks to us in a still small voice. He's just very gentle. And that's what it always is. That's what I was taught growing up. And what I just see here suddenly, I mean, this happened years ago, but there is a display. God is God, right? He spoke mightily when Moses goes up on the mountain. He gives a display. These things happen. It's not, he doesn't just speak to us through a still small voice, but in this case, Elijah's there looking for something big.
He just came from Mount Carmel.
He just came from Mount Carmel. He's just seen something big. He's looking for a big sign. And God says, I speak to you all the time. You're a prophet. I'm talking to you now. You don't need this sign. And it reminded me this week, I went back, there are several places where they come to Jesus one of these times and they demand a sign. We just got through with it in Jonah. He says, you want a sign? A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign, but you're not going to get any sign other than the sign of Jonah. Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days, and the Son of Man will be in the belly in the earth for 3 days. And people demanding signs from God, and it reinforced a lot. These signs are almost, to my knowledge, always to demonstrate to people who don't know him, to make an impression on people, or like when Moses goes up, it says, you're going to see these things and they will follow me or follow Yahweh forever. They will see these signs and it will bring them to me. It will bring their hearts. So in this case, we have this display. God reminds him, and then he speaks to him in a just like person to person. There's the message. And the message, and I've asked people countless times, it says that there came a still small voice, and ask somebody if they ever talk, say, what did the still small voice say? And I promise you, I've never had one person go, of anything other than, I don't know. God speaks to us in a still small voice. What did he say? I don't know. We don't make anything of it. So he says,
And after the fire came a still small voice. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Suddenly a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?"
and there it is again.
Same question.
It's a repeat of the same question. So what do you take from that? He asked him the question. Elijah gives this ridiculous response because he wants God to step in and make all this stuff right. And so he says, look, and he shows him
He's gone.
these signs. He says, I got this, really, I'm capable. And I'm going to ask you again, what are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here? What are you doing here, Elijah? What are you do? You get the thing. Elijah is supposed to see from this, you really shouldn't be here. You don't need to be here. The beauty to me is that God takes the time to point out to him, you should know better, and give him a chance to see it for himself. And we saw the same thing in Jonah when he speaks to Jonah. And instead of just saying, you know what, I'm God, do what I say or else, he sends that vine to give him shade, and then he sends the worm to kill the vine. And he says, do you not understand? There's a whole city down there, 150,000 people. You're worried about a plant. Don't you think I should? And he's trying to, literally showing Jonah in a way that hopefully Jonah realizes, oh, I guess I probably should have thought about that. I probably should have considered that. And here it is that we see the same sort of thing with Elijah. What are you doing here? You got stuff to do.
But what does Elijah say? Verse 14, I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, he replied, but the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I am the only one left, and they're seeking my life as well. Verse 14 is exactly word for word the same as verse 10.
And here it is, and he has gotten the display and he's still not seeing it. And the next thing we see is at a point, God says, you know what, Elijah, you got work to do. Stop whining, stop feeling sorry for yourself. Go ahead and read it. But it's amazing. I don't know of any other thing like this where it's exactly the same conversation. What are you doing here? Well, they're being mean to me and they're about to kill me. All right, hold on. I'm gonna show you who I am. And I'm gonna add, let's try this again. What are you doing here? Well, they're being mean to me and they're doing stuff and they're trying to kill me. Okay, fine. And here's the response.
Then the Lord said to him, go back by the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus. When you arrive, you are to anoint Hazael as king over Aram. You're also to anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king over Israel, and Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel Meholah, to succeed you as prophet. Then Jehu will be put to death. Then Jehu will put to death whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, and Elijah will put to death whoever escapes the sword of Jehu.
All right. So if we don't get anything else out of the day, it's not as complicated as it sounds, but you got to understand what's going on here. Elijah gives his whiny response again, and finally God says, probably most of you are sick of hearing this. Never mind if the horse goes blind, just load the wagon. you got work to do, enough. He says, so what I want you to do is this. I want you to go
Three
anoint.
things.
That's right. I want you to go anoint Hazael as king of Aram. Now, Aram is Syria. Funny thing, he's got his prophet anointing a Gentile king. One more time, we keep seeing this idea that God only cared about the Jews, not about the Gentiles, keeps getting blown up. If we pay attention, it's all through here. They were always part of the plan. And he goes and he's going to use this Gentile king for his purpose. When the Jews get taken to Babylon, he uses Cyrus, another, Gentile, another, definitely Gentile pagan, but he uses him to rebuild the temple. Happens all the time. We just don't pay attention. So he says, I want you to anoint this guy as king of Syria. Problem is, Syria already has a king, right? And I want you then to anoint Jehu as king of Israel. But we know Israel's already got a king.
Ahab.
It's Ahab. And I want you to anoint Elisha as my prophet. He's already got one, and it's Elijah. And he's anointing his successor. And what God's telling him is, I've had a plan all along. And he says that anyone who escapes the sword of Hazael, right? The new Syrian king. So that means they're going to be, these people you're so afraid of are going to come under the sword. And they're going to come under the sword of Syria first. And anybody who escapes that is going to fall to Jehu, who clearly is going to be the new king. That means Ahab's days are numbered, right? Now you begin to see what's going on. And anybody who escapes Jehu is gonna fall down to Elisha, the new prophet, because these Israel kings often have a habit of letting people go, for reasons that God has said it's their time. So here's your first message, Elisha. I have a plan. I've had a plan, and these people you're afraid of are about to be dealt with. And they always were. You got work to do. Go take care, anoint these people, and get ready. As it happens, Hazael, the new Syrian king, is the sort of top general for the current king, Ben-Hadad. And Jehu is one of the top guys for Ahab. And so there's a plan here that has been in motion for a long, long time. And all of Elijah's whining, God, you're not taking care of business. There's the message of this. What are you doing here?
So when you hear that, God speaks in a still small voice, which we agree with, think of what he asked Elijah. What are you doing here? That's been my thing this week. What am I doing here?
Yeah.
Okay, nevertheless, yes.
This story is in two different levels. The human story goes to the wayside. This is a battle between Yahweh and the Baals and all the other gods.
Well,
And
I
that's the
suppose.
big plan he's working on, not who the little generals are or the kings are. I don't care about those guys, neither should you, Elijah. It's beyond your pay grade. This battle is big battle.
There is, obviously, but we're also told, and this is the thing I struggle with here. Let's have a little confession time. I see things wrong in the world and in the community, and I want to straighten them out. I just go out. How can this keep going this way? I'm going to jump in and straighten them out. Jesus came, and he didn't set everything right. He tells people, I'm going to come back, and when I do, I'm going to set everything right. But until then, there's going to be brokenness. So there's a battle going on. But what I think is really important to me, and I hope maybe some others, is that he does take the human side. He goes to each one of us if we listen. And what we're important. And it's mind-boggling. I tend to get lost in the big thing And I tend to be exactly what Elijah's doing. Hey, I got in and worked real hard and it didn't change anything and I'm upset about it.
I'm done.
But God says, you know, I do have a plan and it works itself, you know, it works through the way I intend for it to. Just go do your part. So there is an element of God deals with human beings. If I were God, I would just say, you know what, all of you little, you know, I mean, these people, I would, you know, that's why this is an amazing thing that we live by. So yes, there is a bigger battle going on, but it's not going to be solved. It plays itself out. And all of this Old Testament, all of the Jews, if you begin to look through the lineage, it's all leading to that one nexus point when the Messiah comes, when Jesus comes, and there is a reconciliation between man and God. It is at a lot of levels, but I deal with the human level on this because I recognize God somehow takes time to
And
deal with
sometimes
me.
I think we dismiss the fact, look how much time he just spent here with Elijah, him as an individual, for him to get the point. And that's the same idea of the fact that God knows every hair on our head. He cares about us as individuals. And it's more than just about the big plan. The big plan is there, but each of us, he cares about.
Yes, I think to me, that's the important part. When I was young, I was, you know, I shouldn't probably, but people told me, oh, you're destined for big things. And I believed them and I behaved like that. And I got reminded very harshly a few times, you're not, you're made for small things. And it's but the small things I've learned often are the big things. And the fact that it's not my place to do some great big thing doesn't mean that the time I spend is useless. And that's the message I get out of this. You've got, Elijah, you got a job to do. I got the plan, you got a job to do, go get about it. And now he begins to reveal the plan. You're going to get a new king in Syria who's going to get rid of some of these people. You're going to get a new king in Israel who's going to do more. And then there's going to be Elisha, your replacement, by the way, Elijah. You know, when you say you're done, well, you kind of are, right? There's going to be this changing of the guard, and you've been the prophet through all of this time. And now I've prepared someone else to pick up where you leave off.
So I'll tell you the bad part about reading this. Then I say, okay, I get all this, and now I want God to tell me the big plan.
I know.
Like he does Elijah. Anyhow.
Scott, let me digress a little bit here. When we read the stuff about the great wind broke rocks on the mountains, then the sequence, who's writing that?
Oh, that's so funny.
I talked to Mary about that. Who's writing that? How do we know about it? Because there were no other witnesses, and we can only conclude that at some point Elijah gives an account. And we know that happens. There are other times where we know, and we even see it in the New Testament, that you know, these people give their account and someone else writes it down. And that doesn't strain my, you know, my belief or faith in it at all. It would make sense that Elijah would give his account. And I think that it may tell you that Elijah realized, oh, because what we see is after he's instructed to go do these things. Let's read what comes next.
Nevertheless, I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal and whose mouths have not kissed him. We forgot that one last verse. And so in other words, what God was saying there was, and by the way, you were wrong. You weren't the only one. Remember, I've reserved 7,000 in Israel who never bowed their knee to Baal and whose mouth have never kissed him.
And so there's his answer to Elijah's thing. He's saying, and I'm the only one. I'm the only one left. I'm all by myself. You left me here. That's one of the, when we keep coming back to how important it is for us to be together, for the fellowship, for the body. That's part of it. It's a terrible thing to feel like you're left all alone. And it's, It's why we come back to it as much as we do. But here's Elijah. I'm the only one serving you. I'm the only one. And God tells him, I got a plan. They're going to be dead. They always were. And by the way, I've reserved their 7,000. Does that mean 6,998, 6,999, 7,000? It doesn't mean that. 7, and it's a lot. There are a whole bunch of people living here who never embraced Baal, the Baals, who never bowed a knee or never kissed him. They've held out just as firmly as you have. You were chosen to do this big thing, but these people have held true through all of this. And maybe it's harder suffering in silence than getting to be the big shot who goes out and has the showdown. And so Elijah has been told here, God has dealt with him and said, you know, all your whining, let me show you why you shouldn't even be here. There's a plan and you're not the only one. Stop, you know, don't flatter yourself to think you're the only one strong enough to stay with me through all this stuff. Now, go, get about your business.
So Elijah departed and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 teams of oxen, and he was with the 12th team. Elijah passed by him and threw his cloak around him. So Elisha left the oxen, ran after Elijah, and said, please let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, and then I will follow you. Go back, Elijah replied, for what have I done to you? So Elisha turned back from him, took his pair of oxen, and slaughtered them. With the oxen equipment, he cooked the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow and serve Elijah.
So we have to assume that he has anointed Jehu, or he will soon. We're not told about that part. We don't know about him going to Hazael and anointing him, but we have to assume because that comes to pass. But the bit with Elijah, we are told, Elisha, strange thing, but they mean, you know, they're very different. But he goes up and puts his cloak on him. And remember, there are people who, like the widow, recognized he's a prophet. This sort of you know, camel hair thing that he wears, John the Baptist wears, and by putting that on him, he's just said, there, you're anointed. I mean, it's the equivalent of a formal introduction. And he says, you're the prophet now. You're going to be one, and you've just been instructed. And Elijah, Elijah just moves on, and Elisha runs him down and says, hey, wait a minute. You know, would it be okay if I went and said goodbye to my folks? And it reminds you of the man who said he wanted to follow Jesus, and then said, let me go back and bury my dad. Well, and as we heard this week, that guy's dad wasn't dead. He just says, it's a stall. I want to follow you, but I got stuff to do. You know, that would be hard. I got stuff. This guy says, let me at least go say goodbye. And Elijah, it sounds funny where he says, go on. What have I done to you? What he means is, I'm not stopping you. What have I done to keep you from doing that? Elisha goes back, kills his team of oxen, and has a feast for the family. But killing those oxen is a sign he's cutting ties, right?
And he used his oxen equipment to cook the meat on.
He used the yoke and everything to cook the meat. That says, I've left this old life and I'm going to serve Yahweh. There's enough. Did they say any other words? I don't know. This is all we get. But it does say that he's saying, hey, mom and dad, I'm going out to be a prophet. I'm leaving. And I'm cutting ties with the old life. That's a commitment. That's a beautiful thing. The fishermen leave their boats, they leave their nets, and they just go. To me, it is a sign of extreme faith to just cut ties and go do something.
Isn't that also a precursor to Jesus getting his apostles?
Well, I would certainly see the parallel that you know, there are people that get called and are willing to just go, and maybe killing the oxen is symbolic, but it's a pretty important. We make use of those symbol things in our lives to say I'm cutting ties. Yeah.
Okay, we are. Should I start reading the story? I could probably read this story. So we're on chapter 20, which doesn't mention Elijah at all, but it puts things in perspective. So I'm going to read the story. Is that
All
okay?
right, yep.
Tell me when to stop. Now Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, assembled his entire army. So you can see that Ben-Hadad is still king of Aram. That's
That was the point. Elijah has anointed a new king. That tells you the old one, his days are numbered. And this is the story about that. The reason this is here is this is the continuation of what we just learned.
Accompanied by 32 kings with their horses and chariots, he marched up, besieged Samaria, and waged war against it. Then he sent messengers into the city to Ahab, king of Israel, saying, "This is what Ben-Hadad says. Your silver and gold are mine, and your best wives and children are mine." And the king of Israel replied, "Just as you say, my lord the king, I am yours, along with all that I have." The messengers came back and said, "This is what Ben-Hadad says, I have sent to you to demand your silver, your gold, your wives, and your children. But about this time tomorrow, I will send my servants to search your palace and the houses of your servants. They will seize and carry away all that is precious to you." Then the king of Israel summoned all the elders of the land and said, "Please take note and see that this man is looking for trouble. For when he demanded my wives, my children, my silver, and my gold, I did not deny him." And the elders and the people all said, "Do not listen to him or consent to his terms." So Ahab answered the messenger of Ben-Hadad, "Tell my lord the king, all that you demanded of your servants the first time I will do, but this thing I cannot do." So the messengers departed and relayed the message to Ben-Hadad. Then Ben-Hadad sent another message to Ahab, "May the gods deal with me, and ever so severely, if enough dust remains of Samaria for each of my men to have a handful." And the king of Israel replied, "Tell him, the one putting on his armor should not boast like one taking it off." Ben-Hadad received this message while he and the king were drinking in their tents. And he said to his servants, "Take your positions." So they stationed themselves against the city.
So the king of Samaria sends a message to Ahab and says,
Syria.
Syria sends a message to Ahab and says, I've got, how many kings that say he had with him? 32. He's amassed a coalition and he's got a great big army. And he says, you can't stand up against me. I want all your gold, all your valuables, all of your, I love this, your best wives and children.
Not the yucky ones.
Yeah, not the second-rate ones, but they're the ones you really don't want to let go of are mine. And Ahab says,
Okay.
It says, well, there are too many people arrayed against us. We can't beat that. And he says, send back a message that says, I'm going to give you all my stuff. That's not enough for Ben-Hadad. This is always about, well, if he gave up that easily on all of his stuff, he says, okay, well, tomorrow I'm going to send my people into your country and they're going to go through all your houses. If you think you're going to withhold anything from me, and this is humiliation. It's not just getting stuff. It's saying, it's establishing domination. I'm going to send my people in and you're going to let them do it. And that's when the other people, I think they might have let him take all of Ahab's stuff, but you're not going to take all of our stuff. You can't do that. There's no way, don't do it. So they send back this message that says, the first thing I would have done, but I got to draw the line somewhere. And I just can't say yes to letting you do that. Ben-Hadad is pretty cocky. He's got a great big army. And he says, may the gods deal with me and ever so severely. There's that expression again. As God is my witness, I'm going to ride in and there won't be enough dust left for all of my men to have a handful. In these battles, the soldiers get loot. After you loot a country, part of the way the soldiers, you keep them motivated, is they get a whole bunch of good stuff out of it. They're made more wealthy by it. And he says, there's not even going to be any dust for them to have a handful of this. We are just absolutely going to annihilate you. And Ahab's response, I love this. He says, go and tell him that the one putting on his armor shouldn't speak as boldly as the one taking it off. In other words, there's still a battle to be fought. Now he's blowing smoke. He doesn't think he can win, but he's talking big. He says, you haven't put your armor on and fought yet, and you're already talking like you've won. The one putting on his armor shouldn't boast like the one taking it off after a victory.
The other point before I'm going to read the battle up to here, okay?
Yep.
The point here is they are very outnumbered. He's got a coalition of 32 kings, okay? So it's, meanwhile, a prophet approached Ahab, king of Israel, and declared, this is what the Lord says. Do you see this entire great army? Behold, I will deliver it into your hands this very day, and you will know that I am the Lord. By whom? Ahab asked. And the prophet replied, this is what the Lord says, by the young officers of the district governors. Who will start the battle? Asked Ahab. You will, answered the prophet. So Ahab assembled the young officers of the district governors, and there were 232 men. And after them, he assembled the rest of the Israelite troops, 7,000 in all. They marched out at noon, while Ben-Hadad and the 32 kings allied with him were in their tents getting drunk. And the young officers of the district governors marched out first. Now Ben-Hadad had set out scouts who reported to him, men are marching out of Samaria. If they have marched out in peace, he said, take them alive. Even if they've marched out in war, take them alive. Meanwhile, these young officers of the district governors marched out of the city with the army behind them, and each one struck down his opponent. So the Arameans fled with the Israelites in pursuit. But Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, escaped on horseback with the cavalry. And the king of Israel marched out and attacked the horses and chariots, inflicting a great slaughter on the Arameans. Afterward, the prophet approached the king of Israel and said, go and strengthen your position and take note what you must do. For in the spring, the king of Aram will come up against you. Meanwhile, the servants of the king of Aram said to him, their gods are gods of the hills. That is why they prevailed over us. Instead, we should fight them in the plains. Surely then we will prevail. So do this, dismiss all the kings from their positions and replace them with other officers. And you must raise up an army like the one you have lost, horse for horse and chariot for chariot, so we can fight the Israelites on the plain where we will surely prevail. And the king approved their plan and acted accordingly.
Can I talk about this, or do we have to cut off by the clock? Anybody, can you spare me a couple minutes?
Yeah.
All right. So Ben-Hadad, this king of Syria that we know is doomed, has this massive army. And God says, you know what? I'm going to deliver this victory to you. He actually tells Ahab, I'm going to do this. And you're so vastly outnumbered. The point in all of these uncanny victories is you can't figure it any other way other than this is a victory given by God. And what happens, and here's my sort of private passion about teaching this, is that we're often in a position of doubting. It's the thing I run into. People read these stories and go, this is a myth, right? They're outnumbered by so much. There's no chance they win. This is just one of those Jewish myths. But in our lifetime, 1973 in Israel was what was known as the Yom Kippur War. Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year for the Jews. They shut down the entire country. Even now, TV is off. They shut down everything. You don't even hear the noise from air conditioners No one cooks. We were warned, if you're going to eat, do not barbecue outside. They won't take kindly to it. They shut the country down. This Yom Kippur War, they had been planning, and Israel was attacked on this day from the north by Syria, from the south by Egypt. The Jews were so outnumbered, at least 7-1. You always, they want to argue, everybody wants to argue about the numbers at the Alamo and everything, but at the minimum, 7-1. Up in the north, in the Golan Heights, they brought in, Russia was with them, by the way. This turns out to be Israel versus one of the 3 superpowers in the world. And they had 1,100 tanks, some say as many as 1,500. And the Jews had at most 100 in the number of men. There were 25,000 Russian advisors working on this dual-pronged invasion. 25,000, they weren't advisors, there's well-trained soldiers. They prepared for this, and they're outnumbered. And they still, Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan, when they realized what was happening and how big it was, they started getting reports. They had a meeting, and they will say, we both said, we've lost the country. We have no chance. And you read the accounts of this battle, and it cannot happen the way it happened. It can't. In terms of military, it can't happen the way it happened. And both places, the first day, Syria had gotten all the way down to the Sea of Galilee. And very quickly, they crossed the Suez and they've pushed up, and there's almost nothing between the Egyptian army and Jerusalem. They're done for. And we watched the thing last night about this one guy who's out, they've got night vision on their tanks that the Jews don't have. They've got Russian night vision, and they have Russian surface-to-air missiles, so their Air Force can't win the day for them. And this guy knocked out, at least 20, some people say as many as 50, with one tank, one guy out there with them with night vision, and he's fighting, and he's just boom, 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 and it happened. I mean, it's not like there's some doubt about it. It happened. And the Jews wind up not only holding the line, but they're pushing up into, and I should know the capital of Syria, but they're pushing Damascus. They're pushing, they've got open lines to Damascus, and they crossed the Suez with these pontoons, and they're headed to Cairo. They not only held where it's impossible to hold, they're headed to Cairo and Damascus. And the UN and Henry Kissinger stepped in. Then, wait a minute, we need to stop this. And they negotiated a truce. But the point is this, if you read something like this, where one guy and 32 kings go up against this small number, and the small number defeats them, you've seen it. Or at least the historians have seen it. In your lifetime, this happened. 1973, and they still talk about the miracle of the Golan Heights. I've talked to, and one in particular, one old man that was part of it, and they talk about some of the things that happened that just couldn't happen. They can't explain it. So
we always say God has a covenant with the Jews that we don't understand. It's above our pay grade, but there is something about Israel.
If you read about the Yom Kippur War, and then you go back to this and you go, I don't know, this sounds like mythology to me. In your lifetime, this has happened.
So Google, and I will send that one video of someone who is fighting the Yom Kippur War and the miracle he found.
Next week, we'll follow up with a little bit of this, because there's at least one more lesson out of this issue with Ben-Hadad, and move on. God, our faith is challenged, and you left behind for us these accounts, these stories that say you're in control, that say you have a plan, and even when we don't see it, there's a plan. And then when we do see it, we realize how small and short thinking we are on this, and we're grateful for it. speak to us, remind us. Let us remind each other when one of us is in this situation to be here for each other and say, remember, and you're not alone. And we know that's not an accident. We know that you've made this preparation, that you have created this for that purpose. And we're not alone. And we have work to do, even if it's small work. Give us the strength, the faith to see it and go do it. Those we've prayed for, we pray with expectation. Whether we have the understanding or not, we pray with the expectation that you hear us and that you do act, even at times where we don't see it. As always, this week, be with us as we go out, as we meet people who don't have the understanding that we do. And let us be, to the best that we can, each of us, your hands and your eyes, to try and show people there is a God in this place. Amen.
Guys can unmute yourselves. Sorry, we went a little long. Me and my time, sorry.
Yeah, that's not too bad.
So
Terry, I'm sorry, I didn't see you there.
Yeah.
It's good to see you.
Hey,
So-
Scott,
Did you say you were?
Scott,
Yeah,
hey, Mary, hey, Scott,
yes, sir. Yes,
hey, we ought to have a movie night one night and watch, you talk about not messing with the Jews. Did you ever see that movie, Raid on Entebbe?
this is so
Where
hard.
Idi Amin hijacked a Russian airline with the,
I don't think.
It's a movie called what?
What's the movie called?
Raid on Entebbe. It's in Uganda.
Yeah,
Idi Amin was like the dictator of Uganda, and they hijacked a Russian, a Jewish airline, and the Jews gave them 24 hours to let it go, and they didn't comply, and so Charles Bronson plays the commander of the Russian or the Jewish contingent that goes down there, and they hijack the airplane back. They gave them, you don't mess with the Jews, man. You just don't.
it's full.
I'll watch that.
I think they ought to make the Jewish army in charge of our TSAs. Then we wouldn't have any problem at the airports anymore.
So it is so loud here. I've got the volume. Let me see if I can turn it up even more than that. It's kind of loud, and I'm gonna have to work on acoustics again. But yeah,
The
these,
raid on Entebbe is based on a true story. It's a true story.
it's very true. And I'll tell you one other thing, if you can hear me. The 6-Day War, they went against all the countries surrounding them, and there was a joke that the Russians were selling weapons to the Jews by first routing them through the Arabs, because they took so much Russian.
Oh, wow.
That was sort of the joke, but it couldn't happen, and it did. Militarily, it was just impossible. So yeah, no, these are not myths.
Yeah.
We watched them play out. Anyway,
Yeah.
all this.
Thank y'all so much. Have a great week.
You too.
What do you say?
Bye.
Bye.
Maybe I'll get
Thank
some
you,
headphones
Scott and
so I can
Mary.
hear you guys at home.
Thank y'all.
Bye-bye. Terry.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.